Hello there, fans of old-time rock and roll. This is Peter Scow for Music is a Journey. Today I'm taking a look at 5 songs that were recorded and released in 1964. I'm pretty excited about being able to do this video because I've had this one in mind for some years now, 2 or 3 years, and actually last year I was really thinking about it and looking forward to doing it, but I thought I should wait till this year because of course, we've got that 60-year anniversary. Although most of the songs I want to talk about were actually recorded near the end of 1964. So why 5 songs from 1964? For me, 1964 is an important year in the history of my favorite style of music. Back in 1983, when I was first getting interested in hard rock and heavy metal, I was building a small collection of cassettes, some AC/DC, Judas Priest, Black Sabbath, Van Halen, Iron Maiden, and the sorts. And I bought my first issue of Circus magazine. I was trying to remember exactly what it was. I thought I knew it, and then I searched on the internet. I think it was this one. I know I had this one. I don't remember that this was the first one I bought, but looking at the names of the bands that are in the magazine and the date of release, probably it was this one. Anyway, I don't remember if it was exactly in this magazine, but in one of the early Circus magazines that I bought was in the letters to the editor section, someone had written a brief history of heavy metal, and the history started with heavy metal was born in 1964. Now, this was very interesting to me. I mean, I was brand new to the stuff. I didn't even know that Robert Plant was the former vocalist of Led Zeppelin. In that Circus magazine, I remember there was a 2-page spread, not 2-page spread, but I mean, it was an article of Led Zeppelin, and the opening page was a 2-page spread photo of Robert Plant and Jimmy Page on stage, and behind it said Led Zeppelin 2 in lights. And then I saw it said Robert Plant, and I thought, Robert Plant? I'm in the mood for a melody, I'm in the mood for a melody, I'm in the mood for a melody guy? What the heck does he think he's doing, trying to restart some classic band from the 70s? And of course, I knew nothing about Led Zeppelin at the time, obviously, but I just thought like he had some gall to think that he could revive some old band and he could be the new singer for them. So that's as much as I knew. So I was really intrigued by the idea that heavy metal went back to 1964. I mean, that meant I had 20 years of music to look into. Now, of course, I didn't expect that I would find a Screaming for Vengeance or a Number of the Beast in 1964. I knew it would be a much more rudimentary form, but nevertheless, I was curious to know how it all started. And I spent the next 40 years looking into all that, checking out different bands and finding out who was doing the heavy stuff. Of course, now I have a much clearer understanding of the history of heavy music, and I actually, by my own reckoning, I break it down into different periods. And the earliest period for me is from around the late 40s, I think 1949, up to 1964. Well, let's say 1963 anyway. And during that period, we get things like the first rock and roll songs, we get things like the first electric guitar recordings with overdrive, be it early rock or blues. We get stuff like Howlin' Wolf. Some of his tracks or early recordings featured some very distorted electric guitar. We get stuff like Link Wray's Rumble and what's his name though? The guy who did the Spaced Out Guitar. Spaced Guitar? Spaced Out? I think it was Spaced Guitar in 1954. A really interesting experimental guitar instrumental track was Johnny, somebody named Johnny. Space Guitar, that was a cool one. We get, it's called the Johnny Burnett Trio, and their cover of Train Kept A-Rollin' that featured a guitar riff that would inspire the Yardbirds to do their version. So there was just a lot of stuff happening. The first recording with an actual fuzz box, the creation of the fuzz box, all of that was in that first period. But you didn't get anything consistent for most of the time. It was like songs. There might have been blues artists who often recorded with a distorted guitar, or there was a song here or there, but it wasn't really a consistent thing. And of course, it was blues and early rock and roll. Once we get to 1964, though, something starts happening. We get now the second generation of guitar rock and rollers, and we're getting people like Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, Ritchie Blackmore, Ray and Dave Davies coming in, Pete Townsend, And their contributions, their early recordings there from 1964 would contribute to what would happen then throughout the 60s going up to 1968, where for me that next period is from 1964 to 68, going through the British invasion with the electric blues bands, American garage rock, the whole psychedelic scene on both sides of the Atlantic, and around the world for that matter. And then 1969, with the release of Led Zeppelin's debut, we hit the third stage, which is the first generation of heavy metal, the way I see it. That takes us up to 1975, and 1976 we get the next period with Judas Priest's Sad Wings of Destiny and Rainbow Rising. I should actually keep that topic for another video. So anyway, going back to 1964 was an important year, and there were 5 songs in particular that I want to talk about. So the first one, I think we have to go back to April of 1964. So Joe Meek had put together a band in 63 called the Outlaws, and 2 important members, Ritchie Blackmore on guitar and Mick Underwood on drums. Mick Underwood would show up later on in episode 6 with Ian Gillan and Roger Glover, and he would show up in Ian Gillan's band later on in the late 70s and early 80s. But anyway, the Outlaws, they were originally a country western instrumental band, this kind of electric guitar, country western sounding album. But by the end of their career, when they were coming up to their final recordings, Joe Meek was basically giving up on the whole thing, and he told them, just go and record whatever you like. So the Outlaws recorded a single that was You Keep a Knockin' and Shake With Me. Now, both of these songs are pretty hard rockin' for early 1964. The guitar is a bit rattly, rough sounding. In an interview, Ritchie Blackmore, many years later, said that they were tired of the country western stuff. They wanted to record something more hard rock. Now, of course, that's what he's saying in an interview in 1980s, but it means that they were consciously aware that rock was getting in a harder direction. So what makes that song, particularly Shake With Me, so important, actually both tracks, but Shake With Me in particular, is the lead guitar work that Ritchie Blackmore is doing in that song. He is going like up and down the fret. So he's playing something high and then he's dropping down low again and coming back up high again. And from the other guitar solos I have heard from the early 60s, I haven't heard anybody do that. And the first time I got a hold of that album, the Outlaws album, compilation album with that song on, actually those 2 songs, I was impressed. I was really impressed with what Ritchie Blackmore was doing. So what I'd like to do in this video is I would like to share a short sample just so you can get a snippet of what I'm talking about. However, I don't have any permission to do this, so if the video gets blocked, I'm going to have to upload it one more time with the sample parts cut out. So let's see what happens. Let's hear a little bit, if we can, from Shake With Me by the Outlaws from April of 1964. One interesting point about Shake With Me is that John Peel, the John Peel, said that that was the first heavy metal song. I don't know when he said it, but it's in the liner notes of the album. So that's an interesting point. Coming up now to the fall of 1964, we get a bunch of songs coming together here. I'm just going to take it from least heavy. So we're going to look at I Ain't Got You by the Yardbirds. This was recorded... let's see, it was recorded on September 19th of 1964, and it was released as a single on October 30th of 1964, and it would appear on the album For Your Love, the first American Yardbirds release, which came out in July of 65. Anyway, we're going back to 64, the fall of 64 for this. Now, the Yardbirds, when they first started out, and with Eric Clapton, were very much a blues-based band. They played very much bluesy stuff, and that early 60s British style blues. I think the Yardbirds probably had the smoothest sound in my opinion. But I Ain't Got You has a little bit more of a kick and punch to it. The guitar and the rhythm kind of roll with a little bit more thumps and pounds. And what's most interesting for me is, once again, the guitar solo. The way the guitar riff hits and the guitar solo bursts out, and there's another hit with the riff and the rhythm and another burst of guitar. It actually is quite similar to Jimmy Page and Led Zeppelin's approach on Whole Lotta Love from 1969. And because Jimmy Page played with the Yardbirds for some years in between there, I'm pretty sure that that song probably inspired the guitar solo for Whole Lotta Love. But I don't know. Anyway, so let's just hear a little bit there. This is with Eric Clapton on guitar, of course. Let's see if we can get away with playing that part there in the song where it's that bomb, bomb, and the guitar rips out. Let's hear it. Okay, the next one is actually one of the most important ones, probably the most important one, and just chronologically and weight-wise, I think I gotta put this one in here. I'm talking about All Day and All of the Night by the Kinks. This was their second single release after You Really Got Me, and You Really Got Me and All Day and All of the Night are very similar songs. Had this been an album released at that time rather than a couple of singles, you know, they could fit very well on an album. They're so consistent with one another. And of course, You Really Got Me was later on made famous again in 1978 when Van Halen covered it. And it has been covered a number of times. I know an American garage band from, I think, the New York area called The Remains. They did a cover of it around 1965. And a Canadian heavy rock band, Thundermug, did a cover of it for their debut album in 1972. But anyway, that's You Really Got Me. I like All Day and All of the Night a little bit more. I find the riff is a little bit more, typical for hard rock. And both those songs have the elements of having a bar chord riff, distorted guitar, lead guitar solo work, and more energetic vocals with some of these shouts and almost screams in parts, at least screams as far as 1964 goes. But the one extra thing that I also like about All Day and All of the Night is after the guitar solo, when they return to the riff, the drums are putting this extra little bit in which didn't appear earlier on. And I think that's showing that they're not just repeating, like, here's our riff, here's what the rhythm section is going to play, and that's how we're going to do it for the whole song. They're adding something, which is typical, I think, for a lot of heavy metal bands. You know, they'll introduce the riff, but when they play it again a little bit later on, they might add something to it. And then later on, they might add something again. So that was cool, what I thought about that. And I really think this is such a classic formula for a hard rocking song. So let's just hear that part. I want to get to the end of the guitar solo and that part where the riff returns and the drums kick in between the gap between the chords. Let's give it a listen here. I believe that you and me last forever. So the next song I want to talk about was actually inspired by these two songs by the Kinks. Actually, no. The next song I want to talk about is the B-side to the song that was inspired by the Kinks. Pete Townshend of The Who had heard All Day and All of the Night and You Really Got Me, and both those songs, I think You Really Got Me was actually inspired by Louie Louie originally, if I remember correctly. So anyway, Pete Townshend had heard those and thought that he wanted to try to write a similar type of song, and so that song was I Can't Explain, which if I got this correct, I Can't Explain was actually the first single released under the name The Who, and it was released in December of 1964. The B-side to that, however, was a song called Baldheaded Woman. Now, interestingly, Baldheaded Woman was written by Shal Talmy, who was working with both the Kinks and The Who, and he had the Kinks record it originally, and then he asked The Who to record it as well, because of course Shal Talmy could collect royalties from both groups then for recording his song. Now, The Who, a lot of their early recordings were done with other session musicians, and of course one very famous session musician to play in on the Who, both The Who and the Kinks actually, was Jimmy Page. And Jimmy Page is playing the fuzz-toned guitar on Baldheaded Woman, because apparently he was the only one in the country that had a fuzz box at the time. I don't know if that's verifiable or not, but anyway, so the story goes. So Jimmy Page is on there playing the fuzz-toned guitar, and John Lord is also providing the organ, so that's kind of interesting. What I like about Baldheaded Woman, though, is just how it begins. It begins with this very ominous, mean, distorted guitar, but quite simple, steady beat, and this ominous, dark-sounding chord, dark for 1964 anyway, and then Roger Daltrey starts coming in, singing in a little bit of a meaner tone. The song transitions into a very upbeat, bluesy type song with harmonica, played backwards apparently at first. And as it's closing out, we start to hear an electric fuzz tone guitar solo, which I think sounds like a Jimmy Page solo to me by the playing style. So let's just hear that opening beginning, because I think it's a really good, dark, growly sounding song for 1964. So let's check that out. Baldheaded Woman by The Who. Alright, as you can see, the importance of these songs is not just the consistency in the use of a distorted guitar and having some great lead guitar solos. It's also who is involved. Once again, these are the people who would be instrumental, if you will, in progressing that heavier, more aggressive guitar sound. Jeff Beck probably being the one who brought it forward the most in around 1965-66 with the Yardbirds. But we also are hearing Jimmy Page, Pete Townsend, Ritchie Blackmore, so far Dave Davies. We've got one more song to look at now, and this one here is probably the heaviest of 1964 of all the songs I've heard. This is a song called The Witch, released by The Sonics. It was their debut single in 1964, November 1964. Now, the Sonics started out as an R&B cover band, but in 1960. But by 1964, they were really starting to up the game, put more energy into their music, and get a little bit more aggressive. So they recorded a song called The Witch in 1964, which features some very powerful vocals for the year, certainly, and growly, distorted guitar, but it has also this simple two-chord riff which has a very sinister feel to it. And the fact that it's a song about a very treacherous woman with long black hair driving a big black car also gives it a little bit more of a darker feel for 1964, mind you. They do have saxophone in the song, and there were actually at least two versions of the songs. There was the original 1964 version, and then there was a re-recording in 1965, which I think is the version that appears on their debut album of 1965. One other interesting point, the original release of The Witch was backed with You Keep a Knockin', same song that the Outlaws did for their Shake With Me. Wikipedia cites a couple of quotes in a couple of places in the article about this song, saying that it is the darkest and heaviest song of the year. So very, very important, that one. So let's just hear a little bit of that if we can. The Witch by the Sonics.
Say she's the witch. She got a long black hair and a big black car.
Okay, now there is one other song that came to my attention only recently. I was watching a couple of documentaries about Screaming Lord Sutch, and if you haven't heard about him, he was a fella in the early 1960s in Britain. Well, actually, he carried on until the 70s and dabbled in music thereafter, but his big impact was in the early 1960s, and he was a shock artist. He would, pretend to stab a woman on stage when he did his song about Jack the Ripper. He would often walk up to the audience while singing and then just suddenly scream in their faces. And for 1962-63, he also had hair that was 15 inches long, which I think no other man did in Britain at the time, or most other countries. But in 1964, they recorded a song, and I've now forgotten the title. I'll put it down here at the bottom so you can see. And I don't know if it was Jimmy Page or Jeff Beck. I've read accounts of both being involved in the recording, but I'm pretty sure it's one or the other, who went pretty well nuts on using fuzz tone guitar. If we are to understand that Jimmy Page is the only one who had a fuzz box at the time, it was probably Jimmy Page. But I did see someone comment on the YouTube video of the song saying that it was Jeff Beck who had played on it. I'm not sure, but anyway, it was pretty wild. It's short, but it's pretty wild and heavy. And that's one of the things about Lord Sutch, Screaming Lord Sutch back in the day. He worked with Jimmy Page, he worked with Jeff Beck, he had Ritchie Blackmore in the band for a short while, and all of these, great legendary guitarists who were putting their stuff on with their fuzz tone guitars and distorted guitars. That's pretty cool. So that's it. Those are the 5 songs I wanted to talk about from 1964. We're going to wrap it up here then. February's coming up soon. Got another list of videos. I guess I want to say one thing though. This video here, I'm talking about 5 songs specifically. I have decided to do a series of 5s. It could be songs, it could be bands, it could be albums. Most of it's probably going to be albums. I've got themes lined up. I've got about 16 ideas written down so far. So we're kicking it off with this one here. 5 hard and heavy songs from 1964. I was going to do these at the end of each month, but I think I'll just do them when I feel like it. So my next video might be another one in the series, or could be a couple of videos from now. Anyway, thanks everyone for watching today, and hey, if you know any other songs from 1964 or earlier that have that really gritty, rough guitar sound, bar chords, sounds really like proto-metal or at least proto-hard rock, let me hear about it. Oh, and I know, the Sonics are more proto-punk, but hey, The Witch is pretty dark sounding. Okay, that's all. Catch you in another video, folks. Thanks. Bye.